Good afternoon, everyone. No. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. The beatings will continue until morale improves. I'm Troy McKenzie, and I have the honor to be the Dean of NYU School of Law. And I am delighted to welcome everyone to this special fireside chat with two of the most distinguished and influential legal figures, Vanita Gupta and former Attorney General Eric Holder. There are few who have collectively done as much to shape the direction of law and justice in this country, and few better able to discuss public life and the law at this moment. Vanita is a leader whose career has been marked by unshakable commitments to law in the public interest and to civil rights and institutional reform in particular. She began her career at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and over the years has held a number of distinguished roles, including as the head of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice during the Obama administration, and most recently as the Associate Attorney General of the United States, the third highest ranking official in the leadership of DOJ. She earned her undergraduate degree from Yale and received her JD right here at NYU School of Law, and since leaving government, she has now returned here as Distinguished Scholar in Residence. Attorney General Eric Holder is, of course, also very well known to this audience. He was the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, serving from 2009 to 2015, the third longest tenure in American history for any Attorney General. I just found that out. And also the first African-American holder of that role. Under his leadership, the Department of Justice tackled a number of pressing issues, including the reform of sentencing policy, investigating police departments in the wake of high-profile incidents of misconduct, tackling voter suppression, and many, many other issues. Before his time as Attorney General, he had built a storied career. A trial attorney in the Public Integrity Section, a judge on the DC Superior Court, as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, then Deputy Attorney General during the Clinton administration, and then Attorney General of the United States. He is now at Covington & Burling, where he advises clients on high-stakes matters at the intersection of law, regulation, and public accountability. This afternoon, they will reflect on their careers, discuss the challenges facing our Department of Justice, and also share their hopes for the future of democracy and the rule of law. We are honored to have them here. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Well, thank you, Dean, and thank you for your leadership always of the law school. Leadership at institutions at this moment is not easy, and we're really grateful for it, so thank you. It's good to be here. The dean got one thing wrong already, though. He said it was going to be a reflection on both of our careers. Let's be honest, we're reflecting on A.G. Holder's career today. I just get to ask the questions.
Oh, no, you don't. We're going to be reflecting on you as well.
But it really is an honor. I don't think I've done this with you, at least not recently.
Well, just remember, I still have connections to the FBI, so if this doesn't work out well, you can be disappeared.
Okay, you can't make jokes about that right now. So, so you can see how this conversation is going to go immediately. But okay, I'm going to start with a couple of maybe softballs, but I think they're career questions because obviously NYU is the law school is preparing students to go out and become lawyers. And as the dean mentioned, you've been a federal prosecutor, a judge, you were deputy attorney general, you were attorney general, and now you're a very prominent partner at Covington & Burling. And you're still doing a ton of public service work in private practice. And I just want to know why did you choose a life in public service when you had a lot of choices, and the path into the private sector is one that obviously affords a lot of financial stability early? So why public service?
Well, I mean, it's not like I had a grand plan and made the determination at age 5 that I wanted to be a lawyer. I mean, I graduated from Columbia, the school kind of north of here, that other school in Manhattan. And when I graduated from college, I had a degree in American history. And I was thinking, all right, what do I do with this? And people said, well, you could teach. And I thought, well, let's not expose young minds to me as a teacher. That would not be a good a way to go. So people said, well, if you go to law school, you can use a legal degree for a lot of things. You don't have to be a lawyer. So I thought of law school as kind of the haven for the undecided and ended up there. But during my first year, I took criminal law with a former Nuremberg prosecutor, a guy named Telford Taylor, and something just kind of clicked. And I said, you know what? I think I actually want to be a lawyer. I like the idea of being a prosecutor, but I'm also a kid of the 60s. I grew up at a time of, the civil rights movement, at its height. All my people are from Barbados, the pearl of the Caribbean. And Barbados became independent in 1967. African nations were becoming independent. And so I thought of how can I be a lawyer and combine this social consciousness that I have, this care about equality, and that's what kind of has really kind of focused my career. Even at Covington, where the firm has been extremely supportive of the kinds of maybe a little different things that I have proposed and try to get myself involved in.
And so, you've just done so many things that if a law
It sounds like I can't hold a job. I mean, that's like,
no, nobody's worried about that.
Boom, 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 boom.
But, there are students that I talk to who think you have to plan your career to end up in any one of these particular positions that you have held throughout your career. Did you have any foresight where you were like, I'm going to be a public corruption prosecutor with the hopes one day of being judge or of breaking the glass ceiling and becoming the first African-American attorney general? Like, to what extent was there planning involved in your career?
Yeah, I think the planning that you've got to do as a young lawyer is to do as well as you can in every assignment that you get. Don't assume that any memorandum you're writing, whether you're in private practice, you're in government, you're working for a corporation, you never do anything at 90%. You do it at 110%, 120%, because you never know who's going to pick that up and make a determination about your capacities, your capabilities. But in terms of myself planning, no, I mean, when I got out of law school, I wanted to be in the honors program, the Attorney General's honors program, and I applied to go to the Civil Rights Division, the one that Vanita headed up. But they made the determination that, no. So I ended up...
I didn't know that. That's crazy. Okay. Well, you got the last laugh on that one, so...
Well, yeah, I ended up in the public integrity section as their first honors grad. And... the thought again, planning. I took the New York bar because I was coming back to New York City. I was born and raised here in the cities, center of the universe. So I'm only take New York bar, stay in D.C. for a couple of years. That was 1976, and I never got back. And I stayed in the public integrity section for 12 years. Now I did want to, towards the end of that time, I wanted to become a judge. And so you had the ability to apply through the system that they had, and I was appointed by, this used to always drive the Republicans crazy, Ronald Reagan appointed me to, a judgeship. But after that, things just kind of happen fortuitously. I mean, I tried to do, as I said, each job as well as I possibly could. I think maybe got some degree of visibility as a result of some of the work that I did. But, Attorney General, newly elected Senator Barack Obama, a woman decided to hold a dinner for him so that he would meet people who she thought he ought to meet in Washington. It was a group of maybe, 15, 20 of us, and I sat next to him in the dinner. I thought that was fortuitous, and she actually has told me as I'm writing my book, she said, no, I planted that. I put you next to him or whatever.
No, not whatever, but that's kind of amazing. I mean, your
Well-
whole life, the trajectory of your career might have
But
been
it did.
different.
But we didn't talk about, hey, Eric, do
Yeah.
you think at some point you'd like to be Attorney General? If at some point I decide to run for president, we talked about the Chicago Bulls as opposed to the New York Knicks, Michael Jordan as opposed to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and we hit it off talking about, sports things, but then also talking about the things he had done as a state senator around issues of criminal justice reform and things I had done as deputy attorney general. So that's all that is to say that, you gotta, I think, put in the work, have that resume, that, that body of good work, and then try to take advantage of, instances where the unexpected happens. I mean, it was pretty clear to me that he was a person who was going places, but we liked each other. But our relationship was actually cemented through the relationship that became real between his wife and my wife, and which exists now. I mean, he and I are pretty close. Our wives are infinitely closer than we are. They like each other all the time. Barack did. When I was AG, I don't think Barack liked me all the time with some of the decisions that Jim Garland made me do, but that's...
We'll save that for the next fireside chat. But did you have mentors along the way, who were helping to find, I mean, aside from the woman who sat you next to the future president of the United States, like what about mentors and mentorship?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I have professional mentors, I'll talk about them, but I think my chief mentor was my father, a guy who, as I said, from Barbados, never finished high school, and yet I think is one of the wisest people I've ever met. He gave me a worldview to make me understand that I was going to have to face things as an African-American boy and a man that others did not, and that I should not think of myself as different or incapable, that, yeah, you're going to, the typical thing, you're going to have to work twice as hard to get half, all of that stuff. But also, said, you don't take stuff. That's not exactly what he would say. You don't take stuff, from anybody. Anybody hits you, you hit them back. And he says that's both physically or in some other way. You have to let them know who you are, where your limits are, and and always be willing to push back. When I got to the Justice Department, there were these three guys, three white guys, who decided that I came out of Columbia. I thought, I'd taken trial practice. I was ready to try, the most important, most significant cases that were facing the Justice Department, the Public Integrity Section. They were like, no. And so they took me under their wing, and over the course of a year and a half, really kind of had me in the library, had me second chairing cases, doing a whole bunch of things, just kind of brought me along. And I was so impressed by that when I became Deputy Attorney General, we actually institutionalized that and came up with a mentoring program so that people coming in through the honors program would have formally designated people to act as mentors. But those three guys, really, as I said, they become lifelong friends, but people who really out of nothing more than the goodness of their heart, just decided that we're going to try to help this kid.
But it's also something that I know you have done for legions of lawyers is mentoring them. And I occasionally will get a call from somebody you're mentoring who you've told, hey, why don't you reach out to Vanita if you're interested in civil rights work or this or that. And the power of mentorship in my own life as well, but in watching you mentor so many young lawyers, I think is really so important for people's careers, and seeking out those mentors and finding the right mentors can be the difference between opportunity and kind of being stuck where you are.
I mean, because we're still not at the place where we need to be. And so, especially for women and people of color, there are things that you've got to navigate, things you've got to be prepared for, and the ability that I have at this advanced age to share, experiences that I've had, perspectives that I have developed, I think helps. Vicky Bethea is here. She is she runs my life. And Vicky will take calls from people in the firm, outside the firm, who just want to talk, Zooms, whatever. And it's interesting to hear, young people who have, and I guess I was the same, you have a thought as to what the real world is going to be like, and sometimes they have to be disabused of those ideas. A lot of time, though, it's really just to say, yeah, you can do that. You have the capacity to do that. You got to be smart about it, 110% on everything that you do. But yes, and that's some of the fun stuff. I mean, that'll be a good day when I've had a chance to talk to somebody young. I'll leave the conversation thinking, yeah, I'm still young. I still got it.
Did you have, among all of the legions of jobs, and don't count this one, because I know there's Covington folks here, but in your jobs in public service, did you have a favorite one?
All right, except for Covington.
Yeah, I did that caveat.
And it's not close. It's not close. The job that I loved the most was being U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. I was the first D.C. resident to be U.S. Attorney. It was kind of bizarre. I was the first African American, and I came into the job with the thought, I'd been a judge, and I'd seen people trying cases on behalf of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they were good lawyers, and great on paper, but they were essentially kind of stiffs, and you could see them not interacting necessarily with a predominantly, at that point, African American population, people who were serving as jurors. And they were, from great schools, NYU, Columbia, I'm not equating the two, obviously, Dean. I mean, NYU, Columbia, Harvard, Yale, whatever. And I thought, well, when I get to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I want to do a couple of things. One, connect the office to the community that it is supposed to serve. And so we did a lot of community outreach stuff. Also, to really kind of diversify, where we were getting our lawyers from. And that meant not only in terms of ethnicity or gender, but also geographically. I mean, not just kind of the East Coast here. Let's go West Coast, middle of the country. And I think I know I left the office a lot more diverse, and I think a lot more capable. And the thing about being U.S. Attorney, if you're Attorney General, you do things and, you're looking at the impact of it all around the country, hard to measure. If the U.S. Attorney in D.C., D.C. is like, about that big, 700,000 people, and you can see almost relatively, quickly the impact of programs that you're putting in place. And so my thought was, we're not only going to prosecute, hold people accountable for things that they've done, we're also going to be involved in prevention activities so that people don't get involved in the system, at all. And that was among, I guess I was there for almost 5 years, the most rewarding, enjoyable job that I had. I had Janet Reno, who was the Attorney General, was very supportive of me. And so all these experiments that I wanted to try, she would, fund me, and it was fun. It was just a great job. I love that job.
Just remembering the Justice Department under Eric Holder, quite different, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But about being Attorney General, what were some of the hardest parts of being AG?
Well, the hardest thing, a number of hard things, but one of them was making death penalty determinations. I'm an opponent of the death penalty, and yet as Attorney General, you have to apply the law as it exists, and making a determination in whatever the case about whether or not we were going to seek the death penalty would be one of those things. I'd go home at night, put everything on a table, kids go to bed, my wife's, upstairs, whatever, and just try to determine, are we gonna do this? That was hard. The scope of the job is also difficult. I mean, I'm an Easterner, I'm a New Yorker, long-suffering Knicks fan, so, but have to deal with, problems that were going on in Kansas, things that were happening in Minnesota, in Montana, and trying to be both sensitive to what it is that they were dealing with, and understanding we have limited amounts of funds. I mean, you know that because you had, when your job, kind of nationwide jurisdiction as well, and so that was difficult. And then trying to figure out, there's so much an Attorney General has presented to him or her. What are you going to emphasize? Where are you going to try to have your greatest impact? And then, so that was hard. Also trying to figure out where is it that we need to be? What is it that we need to be doing?
So when you became AG, you came in after the George W. Bush administration, and certainly for the Civil Rights Division, there was a real need to rebuild the division. And I think early on, when you were Attorney General, you referred to the division as the crown jewel of the department. And one expects in a transition between political administrations, meaning from a Republican to Democratic administration or Democratic to Republican administration, that there will obviously be swings, like the parties represent different policy positions and whatnot, and usually the impact is most felt at the department, although this is my view, in the Civil Rights Division and then the Environment and Natural Resources Division. This transition between Biden to Trump 2 feels different to me. Do you agree, yes or no? And if so, why are we all feeling this way about this institution that is so beloved and is so anchored in our country now since its creation? What are your observations about why this feels so incredibly different?
It is different. I mean, they're doing shit that nobody's ever done. Stuff.
There are
stuff.
reporters in this room.
Stuff.
That was off the record.
Evan, that was stuff. I said stuff. They're doing shit, that's fundamentally different than any other administration has done. I mean, you gotta remember, I'm a career DOJ guy. That 12 years at the Justice Department, I served under Republican as well as Democratic attorneys general, Republican and Democratic presidents, and there was always, there'd be differences in emphases, policy determinations, but there was a kind of a core that really never changed. And what's going on, and it's only 2 months in. I mean, we got to remember that we're only 2 months in.
Past 3 months, but it's
three?
crazy. Yeah,
Okay.
I think.
All right.
Anyway,
We're only
I've lost track of time.
We're only 3 months in. Is that right? Okay. January, February, March. Okay, yeah. It's
maybe you're right.
2.5. All right. Hey, don't criticize me. Come on now. The stuff that they're doing, the firing of career employees, I mean, that's a thing, that's like, within the Justice Department, that's sacrosanct. You don't know, and you know this, I mean, within the Justice Department, you don't even know the political leanings of your colleagues. That's just not something that you discuss within the department. And the notion that you have a president abetted by an attorney general taking negative personnel actions against people who they think did things inconsistent with the interests of the president prior, and then punishing them for that is, that's unheard of. I mean, Edward Levy, one of my heroes, the Attorney General after Watergate, a Republican, put in place a lot of changes, a lot of positive things that I think people have generally followed, since his time as Attorney General. And they're just blowing through all of that stuff. This notion that the Justice Department is somewhat independent, you can argue about how much it should be, but somewhat independent from the White House. That is not something that they think is true at all, or something that should be followed. But the thing that gets me, maybe at its core, because having grown up in the department, is the notion that people are losing their jobs. Losing their jobs at the Justice Department. The department's capacity to do the work that serves the American people is, as a result, going to be negatively impacted. We were talking about this, moving people from the tax division out of Washington, D.C. into the field. The public integrity section, where I grew up, has been drastically reduced, almost to just like a skeleton staff. The Civil Rights Division, you got a person coming from San Francisco who, as best I can tell, lives and breathes to simply do away with that which the Civil Rights Division, again, has generally done kind of the core stuff, regardless of who was president, what party was in power. And to see what they have done to the Justice Department specifically, and to the executive branch generally, is troubling, because it threatens not only norms as they exist, at the end of the day, it threatens our system, our system. And I worry about the impact of those threats on our system, or the reality that what they're doing to the system, and the impact it's going to have on our democracy. That really worries me. And so they're doing things that have never been seen before. I think we'll probably get through this, you know, and when we get to 29 January, my hope is that we'll have Republican or Democratic president. You know, I'm a Democrat, so hopefully a Democratic president. But that person's going to have to deal with a lot of damage that has been done by this, you know, by this administration.
And part of it, I mean, I think I'm glad you're saying that we're going to make it through. I think what is particularly distressing is, you know, people may not know the fineries of how DOJ is supposed to work in normal times, but the attacks on many institutions, universities, the law firms, and the legal profession, it really does feel like it's an attempt to kind of break core infrastructure that anchors our democracy, anchors learning and knowledge and education and the legal profession and the rule of law. And you and I have been in touch a lot recently over what is happening with the law firms and the executive orders coming out. It's both executive orders naming specific law firms, full disclosure, Covington, not an EO, but a presidential memorandum that named Covington. And I, you know, there was another executive order, or I guess it was a presidential memorandum that said that the DHS secretary and the attorney general should look into organizations and lawyers that are challenging the administration for whether these challenges are frivolous or unreasonable, et cetera.
Vexatious, that's another.
Vexatious. And you and I have been pretty fired up about this. And I think it's important for people to hear the country's former chief law enforcement officer about why are you so incensed about what's happening, and what do you make of many law firms' responses, some of which I may be coming later today.
Are they sponsoring this? I mean, you.
No,
Dean,
this is.
Are they? I mean, you know, like I can go.
Oh, yeah,
I can go to 10 or 1 on this. You tell me. I mean, well, I think first off we need to understand what's going on here. This is a full frontal attack on the rule of law, you know, and this is not normal. I mean, you know, this notion that somehow or other you're going to tell law firms, in essence, who you can and can't represent. You know, it's kind of like, wait a minute, what? You're going to, you know, threaten law firms for representing certain people, I guess certain institutions, taking positions that are inconsistent with what the president wants to have happen. That is, again, something that we have never seen before. And I think it's incumbent upon the legal profession to push back. You simply can't, you know, cut deals. You know, you can't do that. I mean, the question is, you know, who are you? You know, we all talk about in firms, I think, no, maybe not all, but most, talk about how we're committed to the rule of law, how we're trying to do things to enhance our democracy. And that was an easy thing to do after George Floyd, you know? We had a video of a cop with his knee on the neck of a black man, you know, pleading for his life. And the things that happened after that, easy, but nevertheless profound. And I think, you know, everybody who did all the things that they did should be saluted for it. But now it's hard. Now it's hard. And now this is the question. This really poses the question. How committed are you to the very things that you said you were committed to, you know, I guess, what, 3-4 years ago, however long, pandemic always messes me up, before, you know, after George Floyd. And some institutions have come up wanting. You know, in the brief that you and I worked on, that amicus brief in support of Perkins Coie, out of the top 100 law firms, 10 signed on. and they're like, I don't know, 500, 400 other firms or something, but they are, and again, bless them. They are, medium-sized firms, boutique firms, and they should be lauded for what it is that they did. But for those that didn't sign on to that brief, and I give certain exemptions to those firms that are representing people, and maybe you have to sign them because you're engaged in the fight. So maybe it's 15, 18 firms or something that you'd say, they're standing up for the rule of law. But that really worries me. There are, if you're not full-throated, if you're not using your resources to protect the rule of law, what's the point of your existence? I mean, yeah, we are capitalist institutions that make, great deals of money, and that's a good thing. But the underpinnings of that success is a commitment to the rule of law. I mean, the reality is that you see the best capitalist systems when there is a strong rule of law. Businesses will tell you, that, yeah, we want to go to those places where the rule of law is strong because there's certainty, you can plan things. Autocratic systems where somebody's picking winners and somebody's picking losers those are not necessarily the places where you want to invest. And so I'm worried about the reactions that I have seen from the legal profession to the challenges, the unprecedented challenges that this administration has posed.
Do you, you have led a lot of diversity efforts around the country, and as you said, after George Floyd's murder, companies were, doing all kinds of amazing things just a few years ago, trying to seek to increase diversity, equity, inclusion. And the step back from that out of fear, or maybe they never truly believed, I don't know, from companies themselves has been just incredibly stark. What do you make of this moment on the kind of attacks on DEI? Do you think this is kind of the genuine expression of where people actually are, or do you think this is motivated by the fear of the federal government coming down on them?
I think it's more motivated by fear, I think, than anything. DEI has now taken on a really negative connotation. DEI. In the same way that people don't call themselves liberals. They're progressives. Liberalism. I mean, liberal has been a term that the right has somehow made into a bad word, and so DEI is, I think, trending in that same way. All right, well, that's fine. I'd fight for that, but I mean, how about this? Let's go back to the old school stuff, and what we're talking about is equal opportunity, because that's what DEI is. It's just a chance at equal opportunity. It's a guarantee of equal opportunity. It's not a guarantee of a result. It's just to make sure that everybody's got a shot at getting the job, getting considered for a job, whatever. And then once you're in that job, all right, you see how you do. DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, there's not a tension between DEI and excellence. This notion that somehow or other DEI hires are going to, if they're, I don't know, in control towers, they're going to crash airplanes or something. I mean, they kind of talked about that stuff. I mean, that's just not true. And then when you look at the people who this administration has put in charge of a variety of, institutions, about DEI hires. I mean, or incompetent hires. I mean, it's like, really? I mean, to the extent that you want to criticize these efforts at hiring, guaranteeing people a shot, so that excellence is the ultimate determinant. And you compare that to the decisions that this president has made with regard to who he has named as cabinet members and sub-cabinet members. And this is not the A team. This is not the A team. It's not even the B team, of the Republican Party. Now, I'd have policy differences with people who worked for George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, but I always thought that they were both committed to our democracy and had, generally, acceptable levels of competence. That is not the case with regard to the people who this anti-DEI administration has put in charge of unbelievably important, cabinets or departments within the executive branch.
There's a lot of concern about the weaponization of federal law enforcement and what are the backstops going to be. Students are terrified of ICE arresting without due process, et cetera. And I get asked this question, so now I'm going to ask you this question, but what are the backstops against abuses of power with federal law enforcement? You oversaw 4 major federal law enforcement agencies. In your view right now, is there a backstop? What is it?
The backstop is, the private bar and the judiciary, to challenge those kinds of things that you have described, snatching students off the streets, changing their immigration status, or maybe not even changing their immigration status, but just pulling them and taking them and put them on a plane and sending them to, to El Salvador. And then when you admit that you made a mistake, saying, whoa, sorry, guys down there, we made a mistake, shouldn't be there, but we can't get them back. Wait, what? I mean, think about that. So the backstop is a judiciary that will hopefully, I think, do its job in an appropriate way. But in order for the judiciary to do its job in the right way, the private bar, NGOs, whatever, lawyers have to be able to bring cases on behalf of people who are treated unfairly. And so I think that's the ultimate backstop in the legal profession. But the ultimate backstop is the American people. And I think that we underestimate the power that we have as so-called ordinary citizens. I've had a number of titles, in my career, and I think I have the most important one right now, and that's American citizen. A galvanized, focused, committed American citizenry can stop things, can change things. Women didn't get the right to vote because it was their time. It happened because the American people, led by some brave women, decided that women should have the right to vote. The civil rights era resulted in the destruction of an American apartheid, not because its time was over, but because, again, a galvanized, committed, focused American citizenry led by some young black and white kids, and they were kids, decided that they were going to do all that they could to end it. And we underestimate the power that we have. And we saw in Wisconsin, last week before last, a vivid demonstration of that. And, what I said was that was a demonstration that votes were more powerful than dollars. Elon, you can spend $26 million there, but guess what? Ordinary American citizens doing the ordinary thing of voting told you to take your $26 million and leave.
That was the censored Eric
That was
Holder
the
right there.
censored
Okay. And, some people are worried about whether we're going to have elections. And there's a lot of good and important organizations that have been actually quite inspiring right now, doing extraordinary work, both on challenging the government and going to court, and on trying to do everything we can to make sure we have elections and that people have the right to vote and have their vote counted.
But we can't. We got to understand here. This can't be form over substance.
Yep.
I mean, you can hold elections.
That's right.
Vladimir Putin gets elected.
Yeah.
I mean, they have elections in Russia. He gets I guess 89, 90% of the vote, and the other 10% falls out of windows. But, we'll have elections every 4 years for president, and every 2 years for the House, every 6 years for the Senate. I suspect that system will go on. But the question is, will these be legitimate elections? And everything from gerrymandering, racial and partisan gerrymandering, voter suppression, a whole range of other things can be put in place to render these elections in some ways almost meaningless. And that's what we have to, in addition to everything else, that's one of the things we have to fight against.
Yeah. Yep. And I will just say the groups and organizations that are working on that, including what you're doing at Covington, a lot of the public interest groups are sensing already, feeling the retreat of law firms from joining them in this work. And that is going to be devastating for the ability of communities to vindicate their rights before the courts, and ensuring that we are actually holding the government to account to the law and the Constitution. And so there are some real profound impacts of the kind of retreat and appeasement strategy for the rule of law in this country, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got to understand, if you decide that you want to take a contrary position to this administration, it's not going to be easy, and you may have to pay a price. It may mean an economic consequence for some institutions. It may be anxiety producing if you are an individual, but that's who we are. I mean, that's who we're supposed to be. I mean, look, let's go back to the founding of this country. A bunch of people, Boston and the East Coast decide, we're going to take on the mightiest empire in the world and declare ourselves independent. Really? I mean, what were the chances of that happening and being successful? And we pulled it off. And those people who stood as abolitionists and said that slavery has got to go, again, you do that at your personal. There's a personal cost that you pay. There's anxiety that you feel. There's maybe even physical consequences that you are worried about. Same thing with the suffragettes. Same thing with the civil rights workers. Same with the folks fighting for LGBTQ rights. But if you're not prepared to take those steps, either institutions or individuals, we could lose that which we have fought so long for. In my prepared remarks, I'm going to say something, every generation is called on to defend democracy. Every generation. And now it's our time. Now it's our time. And the question is, what is this generation going to do, given the fact that every other generation who has had to face that challenge did so successfully?
So I made a boo-boo when I started and was supposed to announce that if you wanted to ask the Attorney General Holder any questions, you could write them down and pass them over. So I have a couple of questions from folks in the audience already, but if you do have any, we don't have too much time, but I'm going to hit some of these questions, AG, that people have
But
been
now
interested
these are
in.
supposed to be easy questions.
Oh, thank you. Somehow they. So one of them is, I got several questions actually from some NYU law professors about what do you believe that the Justice Department can be rebuilt, and what would it take? As you said, we're either 2 or 3 months in. We don't know what else is going to happen, and then over the course of the next many months and years, what do you think is going to be required to rebuild a department that already feels, to me, like it's getting hollowed out?
Well, it's going to take, I think, a massive effort. I mean, when I came to the Justice Department, I focused on the rebuilding of the Civil Rights Division, and that was difficult enough. Had a lot of support from OMB, from the White House, gave me resources so that we could hire good people. You're going to have to do something like that on a massive scale. I mean, I actually think that, and it's not going to be just at the Justice Department. I mean, I actually think that, and this is kind of a, I'm still working on what the name of it would be, but there's going to be, I think, the need for a cabinet-level agency that is in charge of reconstructing the executive branch. And that means at, State Department, Defense Department, Justice Department, EPA, a whole bunch of things, reconstitute the AID, it's been subsumed now in the State Department. A cabinet-level agency, person who's responsible for that reconstruction, and I think it will take that kind of effort. This is not simply going to be a budgetary thing, although that's going to be at the foundation. That's going to be at the kind of the core of it. But you really need to figure out, what has been harmed, what capacities have been diminished, if not destroyed, and what is it that we need to do to revivify those those capacities so that these departments can do that which they have always done under Republican as well as Democratic presidents. But it's going to take, as I said, I think a coordinator, a high-level person who, is going to have the ear of the president, and the cabinet's going to have to understand that that's who this person this person is, and then have a staff of some sort to actually pull this, and they have to do it relatively quickly.
Well,
They have to do it relatively quickly.
I also think, and this is for all the scholars out there, that the work needs to start now about thinking. I don't think there's a return to before because of how transformed the federal government is, but that there's a lot of room now, and the work has to start now for scholars and people who are in federal government to do some of that imagining starting today about what this needs to look like.
I think that's exactly right. This is not a project that starts after the election and during the transition. You've got to have a plan about what is this going to look like? And it can be modified, but just kind of what are the contours of this effort going to look like? How does it get populated? What are the emphases that this place is going to have?
Do you think that it's going to be possible to restore some of these norms around DOJ independence? And I mean, once you kind of, what's that expression? You peel the, I don't remember what this expression is. I'm the daughter of immigrants. That's what I blame not knowing idioms on my, but once whatever you've done, like, can you actually put it back? Like, can you have the same norms again? Maybe we need better norms. Maybe they shouldn't just be norms. They should be law. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff I think maybe needs to be codified. On the other hand, a president could come in and in a full-throated way say that, although the Attorney General is a part of my cabinet, there has to be a degree of independence that the Justice Department has. And, the relationship between the White House and the Justice Department is one that is unique with regard to the executive branch. It's different than the Department of Commerce or some other agency, but it's got to be full-throated, and the Attorney General's got to say the same thing. And I think, again, given that this is an aberrational situation that we have, you're talking about going back to that which we have considered to be relatively normal. To the extent that you could make this bipartisan, make this a bipartisan effort, I think that would be significant. But I think that, again, as we're talking about this coordinator, whatever, I mean, that would be something that I would want the new president to come to the Justice Department and, make that kind of pronouncement.
Yeah. I think, do we have, oh my gosh, we're going to have you submit, they're going to be like CUFers from Congress. You can submit them in writing.
Those never get answered. Just kidding.
Anyone who's up for a confirmation fight, you did not hear him say that. Okay, let me pick one of these. You've spoken about firms needing to stand up right now. Obviously, this fight is happening in higher education too. What would you say to the audience here at NYU Law about how to meet this moment as a legal institution?
I mean,
Yeah, and that one was written by Dean McKenzie. No, I'm just kidding.
I think that, first off, you can't be cowed. You got to stand up for your people. There's an NYU family here. There's a Columbia family. And to the extent that somebody messes with your family, you got to say, no, you can't do that. And then the question is, publicly saying that, having the appropriate people within the institution say that that's unacceptable, and not being afraid, to go in front of cameras and saying that this is inconsistent with the rule of law, inconsistent with who we say we are as Americans, and then to come up with what is the legal strategy to protect, protect those people, protect students, protect the rights of students to express themselves in ways that are good. I don't always want to. You don't always want to hear or agree with things that people say. But on the other hand, if you're listening, at least that makes you think. why do you disagree with, that person? And that's one of the geniuses of our system when it is run correctly. But I mean, just again, having that courage, having a plan, and trying to, as it's an easy thing to say, it's harder to do, but having the courage to take on whoever is trying to mess with your family. It can't happen. Can't happen.
And that's a lot easier when there's collective action and you're not standing alone defending just your
Well,
family, but you're standing together across.
That's the other thing. I mean,
across.
we were talking about before, 10 of, the top 100 firms. If law firms had stood together and said, no, we're not going to cut deals either because you've sued us or whatever, or executive orders or whatever, and we're not going to cut deals out of concern that you might do something to us. I mean, these orders that are coming at law firms are facially unconstitutional. And the same thing, I think, in the academic setting. It shouldn't just be NYU protecting its students, or to be NYU and Columbia and, other institutions around the country, and especially the leading institutions, that top 20, 25, universities, law firm, law schools, whatever. Joint action, because there is, it's it's easier to pick off one person, to pick off one institution, if all the rest are just kind of, sitting back. It's a whole other thing if there's a collective opposition. And again, that same thing with the American people. They were going to close Social Security offices, and then all of a sudden people saying, well, wait a minute. I remember talking to this guy who's a donor to NDRC, National Democratic Redistricting Committee, who lives in Poughkeepsie. And the nearest Social Security office for him was, I don't know, in Westchester or something like that. That was going to be, the Social Security office was going to be closed. He was going to have to go to Queens from Poughkeepsie to try to, deal with whatever his social security. That developed, that happened all around the country. And the opposition, as expressed by the American people, and especially seniors who vote, made them say, well, we never said that. No, we're not closing Social Security offices. When there's a document that lists the 20 offices that they were going to close, well, no, actually, we're not closing any offices. So there's power. There's power. We have to understand we have power, and we have to use that power.
So I'm going to ask just two questions. There's several questions that are dancing around. Are you worried that the courts and our legal system are going to be resilient enough in this moment? And other questions that get to, are you concerned that we will reach a constitutional crisis? Obviously, we've been dancing very close. Seems like the Supreme Court's taken some of the heat off of that recently, but just curious about what you think about the resilience of our judicial system.
Yeah, I think we're going to be okay there. When Justice Kavanaugh, I guess it was in the immunity decision, or during the oral arguments about the presidential immunity decision, he said, we're writing for the ages. All right? Keep that in mind, keep that in mind as I hope they keep that in mind as they're in the process of deciding, the cases that will come before them. They really are writing now for the ages. And our system is at stake. Our democratic system is at stake. I think we'll do fine. All the cases that we've seen filed by a whole bunch of great lawyers at the district court level, I think we'll be fine. I think at the appellate level, I think we'll be fine. The question is, what is the Supreme Court going to do? I mean, that really is that's the question mark. There are two votes I can see saying, virtually anything that this administration does is going to be fine. 3 that will say no, and then the question is, it's 2, 3. What are the others? What are the others going to do? Some have taken through their careers an expansive view of what is appropriate executive power. I would hope that for those justices, they would look at not the theory of it, but what the reality is, and understand that a decision that validates that which this administration has done really changes our system in fundamental ways. So I think the courts are going to be resilient, certainly at the as I said, the district court level, appellate level. Question is, what is the Supreme Court going to ultimately do?
Okay, well, let's end this on, you said we were going to get through. So what is giving you hope in this moment? And why should law students be hopeful about entering the profession?
I mean, what gives me hope, again, is the American people. As I was campaigning in Wisconsin over the course of the last, 3-4 months, virtually, in person, ate a lot of cheese in Wisconsin. There's a feeling out there. I think the media is kind of catching up to that which I think has existed for at least the last couple of months or so. People are concerned, mad, angry. They're conversant with what's going on, and they're seeing how the potential negative impacts on their lives. This whole thing with tariffs now and people looking at their 401ks. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff I think that is going to, again, galvanize, focus the American people. So that gives me hope. I think that, this present generation of law students, again, when I go to law schools and talk to them and listen to their questions, that also gives me hope. Because I think they understand the moment. This whole generation of young people, they are too frequently cast as uncaring, uninvolved, and I think anything but that is the case. And I think that especially the law students, who are the leaders of that generation, are going to be engaged, are going to be involved, and are going to fight for for our democracy. And I hope that's true. I think it's going to be true, and that's what gives me hope. At the end of the day, I think that there are going to be pushes. There's going to be damage done. But I think, as has happened in the past, the will of the American people, who are basically good folks. We've not always gotten it right. But I think, got it more right than wrong. I think that's going to carry us through. But there's going to be a lot of damage done between now and the end of this, in this administration.
Well, thank you, A.G. Holder, it's A.G. Holder Unleashed, people. Thank you so much. It's great.